Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Through the Fire. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He is an author and operations manager, Mr. Gene Burke. How you doing today, Gene?
Hey, Ryan, I'm doing great. I really appreciate you having me on your show. I'm really looking forward to the chat.
Hey, I was kind of inspired by what you kind of talk about mindset and you help kids. I mean, those are two things up my alley. So anytime I can bring somebody on that has that kind of mission and purpose in life and wants to talk about it, I'm always open.
I appreciate that. I really do.
So the number one question the audience is probably wondering, who is Gene Burke?
Yeah. So, just a regular guy. I grew up in Brooklyn, been an operations manager for, my gosh, almost 40 years now. I was involved in the martial arts for over 20 years. First and foremost, I'm a husband, a dad, and a granddad, and that's kind of the joy of my life. And just my journey through life, and I grew up while I was in Brooklyn, I grew up in kind of a broken home, and both my folks were fantastic, but they weren't together. So during that time and during that kind of as I was growing up and things I was experiencing and things like that, kind of led me into a journey of how the mind works, particularly my mind at the time, but how the mind impacts everything, and can either make your life pleasant or really difficult. And so that led into honestly, so I've been an operations manager, and I still do that, and I love it. I love operations management because you have an opportunity to impact people in a positive way, hopefully. But actually, I'm a little older now, and I only started writing about 2 years ago. One book was I kind of wrote out for almost a decade, but the other three kind of came upon me. I've been thinking about them, and then the odd thing is, I have really bad insomnia, right? So what would happen one night, I was laying in bed, and I'm looking at the ceiling, counting the ceiling cracks for the 1,000th time, and I'm like, well, I might as well do something productive with my time. So let me get up and start writing. And that started that journey of writing. So that's a little bit about my story, kind of wiggle through the road there a little bit, but that's where I am today.
Awesome. What led you to start martial arts?
So when I was in Brooklyn, so real quick, I mean, it kind of goes back a little bit. I'll kind of build into it a little bit. So when I was younger, I was really bullied quite a bit. I was really, really small. I had a really kind of crazy face condition at the time when I was younger. And, I was bullied a lot. And before the martial arts, actually, in early high school, I began to start lifting. And I began to get very, very good at lifting. And right around the 11th grade, I also had a growth spurt. So those two things combined, led me into, well, I could tell you in 11th grade, 12th grade, the bullying stopped. But beyond that, began my journey into, I learned from weightlifting how taking yourself out of yourself, right? Because when I was weightlifting, I wouldn't be thinking about being bullied. I was thinking about, hey, I got to move this weight, or hey, I want to do this, or I want to do this many sets or whatever. And that started my journey into kind of understanding how the mind and body kind of work together. And then, for years in Brooklyn, for a number of years, I was a bouncer, and which is kind of odd coming from a kid who was bullied, but I was a bouncer in a lot of clubs in Brooklyn. And, I was pretty good at what I did. And one morning I just maybe I should add something to my arsenal. So I started to look at martial arts, and I wasn't really, looking at it to, become obviously like a Bruce Lee or Chuck Norris or something. I'd have thought something might help. But when I got into the dojo and into the karate school, the people I met there, the community that I met there, it completely changed my mindset. I mean, it literally changed the reason why I went to the martial arts. So, I went kind of to do it as just to learn something, maybe something. And bouncing wasn't my main job. I did that on kind of the side, but that's how I got into the martial arts initially, just kind of try to see if I could learn something new that might help me. And then I found the community that I loved, and that's what made me stick with it.
Awesome. Can you explain how martial arts taught you discipline, confidence, and mental toughness?
Yeah. So, I worked some weird hours in my regular job. Just obviously, and again, let me say this again, I wasn't a professional bouncer. That's all I did. So I had a regular job, but I worked at night or later in the evening. And, so the only morning class I could find was this one school. And I started going to class, and that started the discipline journey, because there were mornings where, I had a really rough night the night before at work, and I did not want to get out of bed. Right. And even though I loved the community and I wanted to go, I'd be like, you know what, the pillow is pretty comfortable. I think I maybe want to stay here. And, but I used to force myself to get up and go. And the process of getting up and forcing myself to go really helped me develop a level of discipline that I really hadn't had to experience before. Everyone has you have to have discipline to go to work and everything that you do. But this was something that was optional, right? I didn't have to go to martial arts class. It's something that I wanted to do, even though it was painful to get there. So that actually started that process of, understanding that if I want to get something done, you have to build positive habits. And the only way you build positive habits is through consistency. And the only way you can build consistency is through discipline. So that's how that journey kind of started with martial arts and discipline. And then when you get into the school itself, and it could be any martial art, it could be really almost any sport, especially, well, really any sport. It could be organized, team sports or individual sports. Weightlifting and things like that, not as much, because it's more of an individual process. But there's levels once you get into the martial arts or whatever sport it is, and you have to discipline yourself to get better each and every day. And that's what I loved about the martial arts. Listen, I'll say up front, I was never a fantastic martial artist. I was an average guy. But what martial arts taught me was that, you have a set goal, and you're not always dictating. Actually, often you weren't dictating what your goal was. Your instructor, your sensei was telling you what you needed to be doing that day. But that process helps also to develop discipline, because there were some times where you were doing things. I could tell you, we used to do some, and there's some of my fondest memories today, but while I was doing them, we used to do some really tough training, and I'd be thinking to myself, dear Lord, what am I doing to myself here? But the beautiful thing about that, when you got done with it, what a sense of accomplishment you had, and not just for yourself, but for the community that went through it with you. So that helped, and then, failing, martial arts, like anything, you'll fail 1,000 times. One of the beautiful things about the martial arts is, yeah, you'll fail, but because of the environment that you're in, you're almost forced to continue to try to get to the goal. And I think that's really, really important and so powerful.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Failure is definitely a huge part of the process to being successful.
Yeah, I agree. And I could tell you, when I was writing the books and things, really what was really fascinating for me was, and what I really, really enjoyed, I didn't enjoy it every day, right? But I probably failed 1,000 times on different levels in the books, right? From writing the book to editing the book, because I didn't have an editor, right? So, rewriting the books. I began to use a little chat GPT. Like if I didn't know the grammar looked right, I'd pop it in there and it'd correct some things like grammar and things like that, or punctuation. But and then learning how to get it self-published, so I went through Amazon. So there's a whole process to go through Amazon to get published, and then trying to market it, and then trying to get it out there. And I failed 1,000 times. But the beautiful thing about it is, I don't think I failed, because every time I failed, I learned something. And I would move on from that. I would learn something from the failure. And in my mind, honestly, if you fail, the only way you truly fail is if you stop. So if you're doing something and it's really, really hard and you fail at it, what'd you learn from it, right? I mean, during this whole process, and I deal with this all the time at work as well as an operations manager, there are so many times where you're doing something and you're doing it again and again. And that's the definition of insanity, right? You keep doing the same thing and you're expecting a different outcome. Failing doesn't mean that you stop doing it completely. Maybe you sit back and you readjust, and you recalibrate where you're looking at, and you look at new resources. Maybe there were so many times, and I do this again, like at work all the time. I may come across something, and I'll go out and I'll listen to a Jocko Willink, or I'll reach out somewhere to get some kind of inspiration for something. And then I sit back, I readjust, and I look at the problem set again with fresh eyes. And, so many times during the process of writing the book, I literally changed direction, 180 degrees, because I realized what I was doing was wrong, and I wasn't moving the needle. And there were days where I would, I became really obsessive about trying to get stuff done. But there were many times where I would stop doing anything with the books or anything about writing or anything related to it. And I would take a complete break from it and say, okay, you know what? I need the break. Right now my mind is looping in a particular way. I'm trapped into a potential pattern. I got to break the pattern. And then I come back with fresh eyes and I start again. And I believe that's anything with life, with failure.
Yeah. Well, you touch on it. You've written 3 books. Can you explain them to us?
Yeah. So the first book that was for a long time actually came out last in publication, but I wrote it, I've been writing it for like 10 years, was Eyes Wide Open. And that was about, it's actually about all the soft skills of self-defense. It doesn't have one technique in it, but it's all about situational awareness, personal awareness, mind space, mindset, actions to take before and after, God forbid if you're attacked, things like that. And then came Striking Success, which is a book about using martial arts principles and using the principles to help you in leadership roles. So that goes into team building, goes into discipline, like we've talked about, goes into goal setting. It talks about how to develop processes, the basics. You have to make sure, like in any martial art, if you don't know the basics, you'll never get good at it. So it's a whole book about Striking Success is all about using martial arts principles in leadership. And then the Dojo of the Mind came about because of, when I was younger, because of me being bullied and so many things. And I know so many people are. I mean, it's so common, but, it affected me maybe differently than other people. So I had a lot of anxiety when I was growing up. And, through the martial art, first through weightlifting and then through the martial arts in a different way, how, physical activity can help you with your mental wellness and your mind space. And one thing I want to say, I'm going to caveat here. I'm no psychologist and I'm no psychiatrist. So if people are having, mental wellness challenges, I absolutely encourage people to seek help. And I think that's one of the problems that we have, particularly for men in our country, is that men are afraid that they're going to look weak if they ask for help. And it's actually a strength to ask for help. And everyone at some time in their life is going to need some type of mental support. So I think that's how that book came about, how the martial arts and physical activity can help people with overcome anxiety and not overcome it, but help deal with it. And some of the processes that go in with that. And then the final book was The Iron Road. And I wrote that because, as an operations manager, I've been operations manager for almost 40 years now. And I really began to look at some of the younger folks coming into the job force and what they really need to do to be successful. Now, the book isn't a business book. It's really more about how for personal development for youth, but how certain traits can help you stand out and help you exceed and excel at whether personally or professionally. They're basic stuff, but I think in our society today, we've lost a lot of that. And I think that's why I wrote that book. It's kind of I'm no guru, obviously. I'm not a philosopher, but, I've lived through a lot, as everyone has. But, I thought I'd put it to paper.
Yeah, I like that. How you kind of seen that there's like a disconnect on like the value system that we used to have, and how like your generation, my generation grew up to like the younger generation now.
Yeah.
Like the things that were so important back then just aren't that important now.
Yeah, you see it all the time. And, and here's the thing. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. It's just a different thing, So like when I was, when I first started work, you would never in a million years ever think about challenging your manager. Like it would never just cross your mind. Like it wouldn't happen. It was a different mindset. And I don't mean challenge, and I don't mean like in an aggressive way challenge, but even questioning a lot, like why am I doing this or why am I doing that? It was a different world back then, but our younger folks today, because of and then again, this isn't their fault. And I'm not saying it's a particularly bad thing, because they're a lot smarter in a lot of ways than we were. But they're inundated with information. constantly. I mean, they're constantly, I mean, the internet, everyone, you walk around, everyone's walking around with their phone. You know, my God, I see people looking at the phone when they're driving. I mean, it's horrifying. But, you know, I mean, there's instant access to information anywhere. And there can be great information or there could be really negative information. And unfortunately, a lot of people focus on the negative because we're kind of wired like that, right? Most people are anyway. So these younger folks come into the job market and they have expectations that don't actually always work in the job market. And they're not taught it in school. Like I may be wrong. I've been out of school for a very long time, but I don't think there's one course in any university or any high school where they talk about how to actually be successful in the workplace. You know, no, I mean, I mean that. I mean, they come in and it's just different. And I think it's harder for them and it creates more anxiety for them because there are a lot of levels that they're not sure how to approach. And the challenge is that we have younger folks coming into the job market with a very different mindset. And a lot of the management is older, you know, maybe not as old as I am, but they're older and their mindset's different. And those mindsets don't always connect. So that can create an additional level of anxiety, both for the young person coming into the job market and anxiety for the manager who's trying to make it work.
Yeah. What's been the most rewarding part for you writing these books?
That's a great question. So, you know, one, this could sound funny. I actually told my wife this, you know, when I was first doing this, and you know, just the fact that I was able to get something on paper and published, you know, like, and I mean this sincerely. Hey, listen, everyone, I hope everyone buys my books, but right, if my books don't, and they have sold, but I mean, if they're, you know, if they aren't crushing it on Amazon, you know what? I mean, I'm not going to say it's okay. Buy my books, please. But what I'm saying is, the process of doing it was so rewarding in itself because I had no idea how to do anything of this. I never thought about writing a book. I never did. It was literally one night in the middle of the night, like I have really bad insomnia, and there was a period about 2 years ago or so where I was having a really bad stretch of it, and I'm like, literally, I'm like laying in bed, I'm looking at the ceiling, I'm like, hey, you know, there's those, you know, 1,300 cracks in my ceiling, which I don't have. I'm just saying, and I said to myself, you know what, I might as well do something productive. I'm up anyway, and I got up and I started writing. So the process itself is rewarding in itself. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think it's good material. Listen, I'll be honest. I'm no Shakespeare, right? I mean, you know, you're not going to pick up War and Peace reading one of my books, but the information I think is very valuable, and it comes from a place of experience, and it comes from a place where I'm trying to maybe have in a small way a positive impact on people who might be looking for, you know, just a little bit of guidance.
Yeah. So what made you feel like hey, now is the time to start sharing my story and experiences?
Well, you know, that's another really good question. You know, I don't know if I really have a clear answer for that. I've thought about it for a while, like the eyes wide open. I've revised that in my mind. Initially, what that was going to be was, you know, years ago, you know, I had sometimes thought about maybe start training, you know, like training people in martial arts and stuff like that. So I wanted to write a book about all the soft skills and self-defense. And that's actually how it started. And then it just began to grow and grow. And excuse me, and I've probably modified it a number of times. I know I've modified it a couple of times, but you know, I thought, like, why not? You know, I have something to say. People may not want to listen, and that's okay too. But you know, I thought it was a good time. You know, I'm older now. You know, I'm in my mid-60s, and I have a wealth of lifetime experience. And you know, I saw a need, particularly initially, you know, with the Eyes Wide Open book, because self-defense, a lot of, you know, there are a lot of absolutely fantastic schools. I have a lot of friends who have fantastic dojos around the country and actually out of the country. But, you know, with the self-defense, the soft skills, and then a lot of it for the mindset that people, I think sometimes there's so much depression today. And there's so much anxiety, and rightfully so. I mean, we're inundated with bad news almost every day. Turn on the news, and you know, you hit with some horrible story. and that impacts people, whether you want it to or not. And then, trying to guide people, I thought it'd be a good time as I'm getting older. Hopefully I'll be able to retire out in a few years, and I thought it might be a good thing with the Iron Road to give some insights into how to help people be successful when they're coming into the job market.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think each person's story is their superpower to go help somebody else who's struggling with something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we all, listen, we all have stories. We really do. And you told me a little bit about your story before we got on air, and that's really powerful stuff. And everyone, if they want to, I mean, everybody has a powerful story one way or the other, and that goes back to mindset, right? And
Yeah.
I really honestly believe this. May sound a little bit corny, but the universe exists in your own mind, right? You view the world very differently than I do. I view the world differently than my wife does, my kids, my grandkids. I mean, we all have very unique experiences. And your mind, I really believe this, can be your greatest friend or your greatest enemy. And every day you could wake up and choose, not you personally, people could wake up every day and choose to look at the negative or choose to look at the positive. And that's literally the first decision. What am I going to spend my energy on? I can't tell you the number of conversations. Obviously we live in a very politically charged world today. And I remember I was having a conversation with someone very dear to me. And, we were talking about just politics in general. And they were getting like really, really kind of upset. And, my question was, how much can you control that? Like you're spending a huge amount of your energy um, focusing on something that you have absolutely no control over. And by you being that upset about that, you've never even either whether it's a movement or a person or whatever it might be they're focusing on. I'm like, why are you spending your energy on that? Why not focus on something positive? Why not try to do something? You're finding something negative here. Try to do something that's positive on the other side. And I think that's I really try to live by this, and I've learned this as I've gotten older and older. We all I look like this, right? We all have a gas tank. We all have so much gas in the tank. So during the day, what am I going to expend my energy on, my fuel on? Am I going to expend it on things that I can maybe make a change on, or am I going to spend it and to burn through my fuel just worrying about things or just doing things that are completely destructive or unproductive, and I burn through my fuel and I have nothing left. So it's a choice for everyone. It's not always an easy choice. Listen, we're all people, we all have our own stories and things like that. And I definitely believe in nurture and nature, right? I think we're all born a certain way. I think we're wired a certain way, but I think how you react to your environment and your environment itself is going to determine your outcome. And not your outcome, but your thought outcome. But you can change your thought outcome. It's difficult. It's not easy, but you can do it. It takes a will to do it.
Yeah, that is completely so true with how you said that. So many people focus on things that are out of their control. I see it so many times, like people complaining about like politics and everything. It's like you're never going to be able to change it or do anything about it. The only way you can change it is from the inside.
Exactly right.
Like you do you want to go down that path? You're going to have to go get on the inside to change things like that, and then good luck with that. But
Yeah,
like other than that, you got to focus on what you can control in your own area.
I agree. It's funny. I still have a challenge with this, right? So I watch the news a lot, and I really shouldn't. But well, I mean, the problem is we are absolutely inundated with negative news. I mean, it's 24/7, and we're your brain is you develop neural pathways over time, and the more you think about something, whether it's positive or negative, you're going to build a stronger neural pathway. So if you're constantly thinking about something that's negative all the time, or it's like a muscle, over time it becomes the normal process for your brain how you're thinking, right? So we're constantly, and my wife is so funny. My wife's like, why are you watching that? Because she tries to avoid the news, and God bless her. I mean, she's a lot smarter than I am. But I'll get there, and I don't get riled up about it. But there are times when I get really irritated, and then I sit there and I think to myself, well, I'm not even doing what I say to do. right? Like I'm wasting energy on something that I can't control, and then I stop doing it. I heard this. This is probably going to sound so crazy, but it's really actually helped me a little bit. I didn't really think about this. I wasn't exposed to this until a few months ago, but it really helped me. It actually helped me the other day. That you think about your mind like the sky. This is going to sound really kind of out there, but it really is kind of an interesting metaphor. So you look at the beautiful blue sky, or at night you see the beautiful stars, at night, dark stars. But there are clouds coming through, and either they're white and fluffy or they're dark and menacing, right? So, your mind is kind of like that, right? So you have thoughts coming in and going all the time. It's just a way we're wired. No, even with meditation, people will meditate. Some people think meditation is about clearing your mind completely. That's not it at all, right? And I'm not a great meditator, but I'm pretty sure I understand the process behind it. Is that you don't focus on any particular thing, meaning like maybe you're focusing on your breath, but if you have a distracting thought come through, let it come and let it go, right? Don't hold on to it. So I was literally thinking about this the other day. I came across this concept a couple of months ago, and something happened at work, and I was kind of irritated going out. And I looked out, I got outside out of the building, and I'm looking out, and I'm watching these clouds, right, going by. And I'm like, you know what? That's kind of a dark cloud, and that's where my mind is right now. And I'm going to watch that drift away. And it sounds crazy, but it took me out of myself. And I was like, wow, it kind of, actually kind of helped, right? Like I'm like, that's that bad thought, and guess what? It's moving, and soon it's going to be out of my view. And it's kind of out there a little bit, but it's something that I'm starting to do more. And I think it's, for me personally, it's helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm on that same page as your wife of, hey, I don't need to watch the news. I don't need to be inundated with half this stuff. That was
Right.
one of the first things I learned with like upgrading my own mindset was it's everything that allow to come in to my life, like music, shows, like what I read, everything, what I bring in is going to affect me. So, like some people think like, man, he's just like he doesn't care about this stuff. Like, well, I really just don't like. I'm not, I don't care about it because I can't control any of that. It has
Right.
nothing to do with me. It's going to happen no matter what
Yeah.
my opinion on it is.
No, I agree. I remember I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and they were getting kind of riled up about some stuff. And I'm like, look, man, when it comes to my front door, then I'm going to worry about it. But right now, I can't control it. So why am I going to be, bugging out about it? I can't control it. I'm wasting my energy doing it. And, all these recent events that happened, I could tell you that, very it's obviously a lot of emotions going on right now, especially in the U.S. with all the things that have happened recently. And, I got myself caught up in that for a couple of days where I was, really, really, really angry. And I thought to myself, what's that going to do? It's not helping me. It's like what the Buddha says, right? If anger is like is like holding a hot coal before you give it to your enemy, it's still burning you, right? You
Yeah.
hand them a hot coal, it's going to burn you, but it's going to burn your enemy as well. So, what's the point in that? And, so I think that it's really important. And I think as a society, and I think this is something that I don't know if we ever had it, but I think it'd be helpful if we move towards it. You know, if people can't control their own emotional outlets, let's say, how they react to things, it's very difficult to have a productive society. It
Yeah.
really, you know.
Yeah. Completely agree. Why do you think it's important to work on yourself both personally and professionally?
Well, I think it's otherwise, you become stagnant. For me personally, I always like to learn something new. I'm constantly either reading or watching something. I try to always find positive people to watch on YouTube. You, for example, in your podcast. No, but I'm saying, I look for the positive because that's really important. And I think it's important for people in general to continue to strive to grow. And growing doesn't mean that, I don't know if you know the concept of now it's escaping me. Um, and now it's escaping me. I can't believe Kaizen. So it's a Japanese philosophy where I actually call it the Milo effect. I call it the Milo principle. So, but with that is if you change very slowly, right? So let's say if you change just 1% a day or 1% a week, over time that accumulates into huge change, right? So I think people, what happens is when they think about they want to change what they're doing, or they want to change their lifestyle, maybe they want to lose weight, or maybe they want to grow muscle, whatever it might be, they overwhelm themselves. They think, oh my gosh, this is an absolutely huge process. I'm not going to be able to do it. So guess what? Step back and do it in small increments, really small increments. And then over time, as you build those successes, your momentum gains, and that outcome becomes much more of a something that can happen, right? And then also when you're doing really small changes over time, positive changes over time, if you're finding something that isn't working, you have the ability to shift. Sometimes people take on these huge projects and they delve into it and something goes south in the middle of it, right? Because, Murphy's Law absolutely exists. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And sometimes it's not going to be great. So can you adjust to it on the fly, right? So if people jump into these huge projects and they overwhelm themselves, and what happens when people get overwhelmed? They often shut down. And then they stop trying to grow because they think they can't do it, but they can do it. But it's all about your mindset. It's all
Yep.
about accepting the fact that you're going to fail. There's a great philosophy in the martial arts, which I love, and it's 7 times down, 8 times up. You're going to fail a lot. Just keep getting up. That's all it is.
Yeah, I completely agree with how you said chunk it down. That's like one of my major things I tell everybody. If you're going to try to achieve something big, chunk that down, because not you're going to be scared looking up at that huge mountain. Like
Absolutely.
chunk that down a little bit each time in each incremental steps, and eventually you're going to reach it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about like from a weightlifting analogy, right? So I don't know if you listen to this. I'm sure some do. So let's say someday somebody wants a bench press, 400 pounds, and that's their goal. If they come in the first time and they pick up a 400-pound, first they're not going to get it off the rack. But then if miraculously they got it off the rack, they're going to get crushed under that weight. So what people do, people make out a plan and they say, hey, over the next 5 weeks or next 5 months, I want to go from this weight to this weight. And then they can gauge their progress. It's the same thing with anything. There are very few, listen, there are some really, really gifted people in the world who could take on projects on the spur of the moment and be spectacular at them. Well, God bless them. I'm not one of them, and a lot of people aren't. So most people need to take a bigger picture and break it down into smaller chunks and then work on building that canvas out.
Yeah. Why do you think most people only work on one, like either personal development or professional development, one at a time and not both? And seeing how they like interact and like doing it together would be more beneficial.
That's a really, really, really interesting question. It really is true. A lot of people at work, let's say, not where I'm working now, but I mean, over my span of my career, would really focus on their professional life, and their personal life was, not going well. So because they were focusing too much on one and not on the other. So sometimes people create silos in their mind. They don't realize that everything's connected, right? So everything that you do, if you're doing something positive in your professional life, it's going to overflow into your personal life, whether you're coming home happier, or you're making more money, or you're feeling fulfilled and successful, and you kind of bring that vibe home, and vice versa. Uh, if you're having a really hard time in your personal life, you can tell when people had a bad day, night at home or over the weekend or whatever. They come in on Monday morning, or any night or any day in the morning. You can tell when they've had a rough time. So your personal and your professional life, unless you're single, right? And you still have friends around you, and you may not be married or whatever, but you're interacting with other people. Your personal life and your professional life, even though they're two different silos in your life, they absolutely impact each other. So I think it's really critical that there should be crossover. Take the positives that you're taking from your professional life. Let's say it's goal setting, and you haven't been great at that at home. Well, transfer that over. See if you can, kind of move that mindset from your professional life and bring it into your personal life, and vice versa. Let's say, for example, at work, you're typically, let's say, not as positive, or you're more pessimistic about outcomes, but you're really optimistic at home. Your home life's going great, and everything's going the way you want it to. Try to translate what are you doing right in your personal life, and try to translate that into your professional life. I think they go hand in hand. And it's a shame a
Yeah.
lot of people don't do it at the same time.
Yeah. That's one thing I figured out. Everything is tied together.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Why do you think most people lack purpose and clarity in life?
You hit me some really good questions here, Ryan. That's awesome. You know what? I think they've never been told to. I think a lot of people don't realize. Listen, I really honestly believe this. I believe everyone has an incredible amount of potential that they don't tap into because they've never been told that they can. Right? We go to school. What happens when you go to school? And this is nothing against the educational system. I'm just saying, just the reality of things. So you go to school, and the focus is to learn. But what's learning? Passing a test, right? Making sure you're passing a test. And then you go on to college, and maybe you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. A lot of people don't. So a lot of people go to college, and then they have majors. But what's the purpose of that? What's your actual purpose? What do you want your legacy to be? And I think a lot of people don't realize that they have potential inside them that they never tap into because they've been told they can't, or worse, they've been told that you're no good, or you're not smart enough to do that, or you don't have the background to do that. And the people who do that to people who are trying are afraid themselves because they're afraid people who are around them are going to succeed, and it's going to kind of bring up their own failures in life. When people are telling you negative things like you can't do this and you can't do that, you know what, you might not be able to, but try. And disregard it. It matters what you think, unless you're doing something that's obviously really bad or criminal or whatever like that. But if you're trying to make a better life for yourself and your family, or you're trying to learn something new, and someone's saying, "Oh, why would you learn that?" or "What's that going to do?" It doesn't matter what they think. They're not you. I tell you, I heard another great quote, which I absolutely love, and I heard this last week. And it was a gentleman who said, "You know what? I was told my whole life that I would always get upset when I heard that someone didn't like me, or someone didn't like to be in my company." And he said one morning he woke up and he said, "Hey, you know what? I would like to take someone like me out for a beer." We are so incredibly hard on ourselves. And that's one of the things that's kind of the mindset that I have, and what I kind of try to teach folks coming into the job force and things like that, and through my books and everything, is we are unbelievably difficult to ourselves, right? We talk to ourselves often, not everyone, but many people do, talk to themselves in a way that they would never talk to their best friend. Like, we're down on ourselves. We say we're stupid, we're fat, we're ugly, whatever. That is, if you think that, and not everybody, but a lot of people do that. And we're so hard on ourselves that we kind of dampen our own spirit. And I think that if we could teach people at a younger age to embrace themselves, they're unique. Hey, listen, both you and I, there will never, in all of the history of the universe, there's one you and there's one me. And there's one person like that, all 8 billion of us. We are individually, even though we're all human, we are individually incredibly unique. And we have unique experiences, and people should embrace that.
Yeah. Do you have any advice on how somebody might find their purpose?
First I would say maybe find something that really interests you, or look at individuals in history, whether past or present, that inspire you, and what are they doing, and find out why they're doing it, not just what they're doing, but find out why they're doing it. And you may find something there. You may find something that inspires you to find a purpose, whatever it might be. And it could be even on a very local level. Are there people in your community, that are doing great things in your community? And maybe that's a purpose that can help, that's something that might be a fulfilling purpose for you. I think it's very individualized, and I think it's individualized how people find it, but I think it's definitely possible to do.
Yeah. I think that's one thing a lot of people are lacking right now too, is not knowing their purpose and being clear on what they really want.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And again, I think that's part of our, I think it's part of our society as a whole. Um, there's a very, there's a, it's almost like, just was that phrase, get by to get whatever, get by to, get along to get by or whatever.
Yeah.
No, nobody wants to, not that they don't want to stand out, but they don't think that there's really a calling for it, and that's one of the things, when I wrote, the book, The Iron Road, what's really almost sad in a way is, and I don't mean this to be degrading to really any age group, but because of society and where we've gone in a while in terms of what we teach values and things like that, I'm talking about like work ethic and things like that. You know, um, it's a lot easier today to really stand out in a really high level than it was
Yeah.
maybe 40 years ago, or 30 years ago, even 20 years ago. So, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of drive and a little bit of willpower and a little bit of consistency and positive habits, you can absolutely stand out in the crowd. And I think that's something that I think should be taught in schools. And right now, I don't think it is.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. How would you suggest someone build confidence in their abilities? Because there's so many people that struggle with self doubt.
Oh, listen, my friend. I write about this and I talk about this, and I deal with self doubt all the time. We're human. We're kind of wired like that. But you have a choice, right? You have a choice to let that self doubt keep you down and stop you from doing things, or you can say, okay, I don't know if I can do it, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. I'm going to give it a go. And if nothing comes from it, I tried and I learned something in trying, and that's a success in itself. And I think that, confidence is something that can be built over time, obviously, but you have to understand that um, failing isn't a negative thing. I think so many people are afraid to try things because they're afraid they're going to fail and look stupid, right? Or look like they're incompetent or look whatever. And the reality of it is everybody fails. Nobody's perfect. So to build confidence, even if it's tiny things, that's what I go back to. Take tiny, tiny steps. And over time, as you continue to succeed in those tiny steps, your confidence will build. And over time, you can develop a great deal of confidence in doing that. But always understand, your mind's a funny thing, right? You could be as confident in the world. I guarantee you, I don't care who it is in the world. I don't care what world leader it is. I don't care what motivational speaker it is. Every single person, we're human. We have doubts and we have self doubts. It's what you do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one thing that a lot of people don't understand, that like everybody has some sort of doubts in their heads that they have to like conquer at moments.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the way we're wired.
Yeah.
No one's running around screaming about puppies and rainbows all day. You know what I mean? Everybody has negative moments.
Why have you devoted so much of your time to try and help younger people find their path?
Well, I think it's really important. I think that they're our future. They're our future for our country. They're our future for our communities. And I think it's, listen, I don't have all the answers. I wrote these books and I give these, I'm starting to give some talks and things like that. I think it's really, really important that, and I think that we have some type of structure for folks coming up, younger folks coming up, to give them some guidance from people who have lived it and have gone through it. And I think that in a lot of ways, again, it goes back to the negativity. I think, we don't have a lot of positive role models in the world today. And I'm not saying I'm a positive role model. What I'm saying is that I think it's really, really important that we give youth every tool to an advantage that we can help give them so that they can be not just successful in business, but successful in life, meaning that they're happy, that they're prosperous, that their families, those they love are happy and prosperous as much as possible. And I think that's really, really important. And I think that we're scattered today, and there's not a lot of focus on one particular, outcome or drive. And I think that's important to try to help younger folks help themselves find themselves and find out that they truly are. They have a lot of potential that they haven't tapped into yet.
Yeah. Completely agree with that. How can people get a hold of you?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I have a website. I just started the website, so it's a little still getting it now. I'm going into a new world now, so I just started a website. So it's www.thirdmonkeypro.org, and my books are found on Amazon. If you just type in Gene Burke, you'll find my books on Amazon. And basically, through the website, it has all my contact information and things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll put all that in the show notes for people to find all that too.
Thank you.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
Nah, you're great. That was absolutely awesome.
Awesome. Hey, I appreciate you, definitely. Okay, final question. What is one piece of advice you'd like to leave our listeners with about overcoming adversity?
All right, there we go. So, and again, I tell you, Ryan, you have some great questions, my friend. So, I think just keep trying. Shift if you have to. Shift your approach if you have to. And one of the things that I try to tell everyone is be kind to yourself. Right? Everybody has adversity in life. You don't have to make, you shouldn't try to make your life harder than maybe you're experiencing at the moment. So give yourself a little bit of leeway. Give yourself a little pat on the back, right? You're getting up every day, you're doing your thing, and be kind to yourself during the adversity, and realize that you have the strength to overcome anything, and reach out for support if you need it. I think it's really critical. I think especially for young men, I think it's really, really critical that they ask for help when they're going through challenging times, because I know when I was growing up, I mean, I tell you, I grew up Irish Catholic. You put it like this: it wasn't a thing to do to ask for help, right? And I think it's really, really important. I'm not saying anything against Irish Catholics. I love Irish Catholics. I'm Irish Catholic. What I'm saying is, that's the environment I grew up in society, in a time. Remember, I'm older. Back then, people, men especially, did not ask for help when they were having a challenging time. Reach out to a counselor, reach out to your friends, reach out to family, and just be kind to yourself during adversity, because it will pass.
Hey, great advice right there. I can relate to that because that was kind of how I was kind of taught to live with, hey, you're not tough if you just don't bury everything down and get through it and find a way through. It's like, man, we're not made that way. Eventually, what you keep like burying down and putting within is going to eventually want to come out.
Absolutely right. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Well, Gene, hey, it's been a pleasure to having you on. Thank you for coming on here, sharing your insight with us.
Can I tell you, Ryan, this has been a real joy, and I really appreciate the opportunity of being on your show. It's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here today. Remember, the only way to get what you want is to go through the fire.